What could it mean for the world if a legendary creature like the Yeti really exists? The mysteries of Tibet, Nepal, India, and the Himalayan region began to be unveiled by men of the past, but few have put it all together, and even fewer can accept the truth when it's finally uncovered. And that's what I'm going to present for you today. Not a conventional show about the Yeti, but a metaphysical breakdown you've never seen before. Join me, Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of this world. In 1887, Major Lawrence Waddell from the British Indian Army was exploring around the Himalayas when he reached an area in Sikkim in northeastern India. Now, this was not an easy hike, with the cold and the elements making the weather vile there in the mountains. So it was a pretty big surprise to come upon a set of tracks made by some creature walking on two legs and bare feet. The tracks went on and on over the freezing snow and clearly marked out a course through the land that followed the path of least resistance. The path even impressed the mountain-born locals with Waddell that day. But why was that a big deal? This was one of the earliest accounts to appear in print in the English language in modern times of the abominable snowman. That's pretty amazing, so I scoured countless old newspapers, out-of-print books, and internet archives for more information on the Yeti, and what I found was pretty shocking. Across the globe, there are well-documented accounts of massive gorilla-like beasts spotted in snowy mountains with full-on evidence like photographs of footprints, documentation of fur samples, and local histories that trace back centuries. So check this out. I found the account of Waddell finding Yeti footprints in a fantastic book called Abominable Snowmen by the British biologist Ivan T. Sanderson, which was really interesting because he approached subjects like the abominable snowman as a researcher instead of as a fanatic or someone trying to debunk it from the beginning. In fact, Sanderson and the stories he wrote about were from well-respected people, military men, highly educated explorers, and native Sherpas who'd lived in the mountains for decades. So I really wanted to give the Yeti accounts the same respect without dismissing them right away, and also consider when they could just be entertaining stories too, of course. But this was the shocking part. I found that old wives' tales are often the most public accounts of real paranormal phenomena that are happening in different areas. They're like breadcrumbs that governments of the world have looked into, explorers and researchers have looked into, and now I've looked into. So let's jump into one story that's got corroborative evidence. In 1902, officials in British India wanted to string the first telegraph wire from Lhasa in Tibet to Kalimpong in Darjeeling, India. Well, the cable had to be unraveled and installed first by a crew. But when they reached a pass on the Tibet-Sikkim border, an incident occurred. A dozen workers failed to return to their camp one evening, so the next day a military posse was sent out to find them. But the men were gone without a trace. The soldiers widened their search, and finally, during one sweep of the area, they found a, quote, remarkable creature asleep under a rock ledge. The Indian officials, who were not Sherpa natives, shot the creature to death immediately. Sanderson wrote, quote, it proved to be human rather than animal in form, though covered with thick hairy fur. Up to this point, the report is official. Then it becomes unofficial, but for one minor aside to the effect that a full report, together with the beast, was shipped to the senior British political officer, then resident in Sikkim, who is correctly named as one Sir Charles Bell. Okay, so this Yeti encounter was so legitimate, they wrote up a report about it, which they sent to a senior officer, along with the creature's body. But how could we know that really happened? Well, this is where it got really interesting for me. The journalist John Keel corroborated it. Does his name sound familiar? That's because he's the most famous for his book, The Mothman Prophecies, which investigated sightings of Mothman in Point Pleasant so thoroughly that he became the ultimate source for information on it, and the info spread all over the world. But if you think this guy wasn't legit, John Keel was also in the military, later a technical advisor to the Library of Congress. He was the inventor of the term Men in Black, and he conducted on-the-ground expeditions himself in places like Southeast Asia. Around 1954, Keel traveled around Southeast Asia for several years, looking for the truth about religious men and yogis, Indian performers of magic tricks, and even the Yeti. As a Western skeptic, when Keel first saw enormous barefoot prints in the mountains that couldn't belong to a man, he still couldn't believe it was from a Yeti. But then Keel heard this exact same story of the missing men and the shot Yeti from an old man in Darjeeling who told John Keel that he'd seen that creature with his own eyes. The man described it as 10 feet tall, covered with shaggy hairs 2 or 3 inches long. Its gruesome face was hairless, set with a mouthful of sharp yellow fangs and cold red eyes, and bizarrely, its feet were pointed backwards. Honestly, I don't know what to make of that. But now, after this beast was shot and delivered to Sir Charles Bell, the story goes that he ordered the carcass packed and shipped away, supposedly to England, and it was, of course, never seen again, and there is no trace of it to today. So where is it now? In a government bunker? Stuffed in a coffee shop in Kathmandu? Is someone going full Buffalo Bill on it?
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
I don't know, but if Yeti are indeed real, then this brings up another question. Are the Himalayan tales of magic, monks' superpowers, and snowmen also real? There are a couple most famous accounts of Yeti expeditions out there, and one was led by British explorers Edmund Hillary and John Hunt to the summit of Mount Everest in 1953. They all became the first confirmed climbers to ever reach the summit, and Hillary even brought the scalp of a Yeti back to Britain, which I'll get back to later. Their local guide was one of the most well-respected Sherpa natives in all of India named Tenzing Norgay. And he had maybe the most fantastic story you've never heard about the Yeti, which he told John Keel. Tenzing's brother-in-law was once an assistant to the Sangye Rinpoche of the Rongbuk Monastery. That title was super significant, and this was an extremely important man who the brother-in-law was with. The Sangye Rinpoche is like a priest/revered teacher who's trying to reach enlightenment, and he's the monastery's great lama. Well, why do we care? Well, Tenzing's brother-in-law went with this Grand Lama on his annual treks to meditate in the high secret holy places on the mountain. During one of these treks, another assistant Lama found a dead Yeti and presented the skin to the Grand Lama. It looked like the skin of a young bear, and the Grand Lama used it for years afterwards to sit on while meditating. After his death, the old skin was probably also placed on his shorten, which is a shrine. Okay, this was blowing my mind. The leader of a monastery does not casually accept a random animal fur and use it for his entire life and have it draped over his shrine when he dies if it's not significant. Clearly, this thing was important to them. You know, there are many accounts of monks in modern times venerating Yeti hair and saving their bones almost like sacred relics. John Keel wrote that the lamas of the Himalayas believed the Yetis were devils posted around the mountains to guard the gods who lived on the summits. In fact, the summits of some mountains were considered so sacred that Western explorers were forbidden to climb all the way to the top, or they would anger the gods. Maybe the warnings were also to avoid disturbing supernatural beings or fearsome creatures. So before I go any further, I wanted to point out some really strange things that I saw becoming patterns with Yeti stories. One, I actually found quite a few separate reports that Yeti tracks seem to face the wrong way, as if these creatures have feet pointing backwards or walk on their knees or something. Super weird. One report wondered if the shot creature could have just had ape hands on his feet that crumpled the wrong way when it died, but there are too many of these reports to not at least consider there's something different about these native Yetis. Two, it's well known today that certain Tibetan and other monasteries revered or respected the Yeti enough that some have kept pieces of their bodies. So sitting on the pelt of one to meditate isn't really that far off if a monastery's leader really got his hands on one. There's a Himalayan monastery today in Kamjung, Nepal that actually claims to have the scalp of a Yeti skull, and the pictures are still online today. There's another monastery in Pangbosh, Nepal that also claimed to have the hand of a Yeti. Now, the scalp is in a padlocked box, but testing said it was the hide of an animal, not a Yeti. Similarly, a bone from the Yeti hand was tested and determined to be human, but some have claimed that the Yeti hand was actually a mix of human bones and the original material. So it's possible more DNA tests would need to be done because all they tested was a finger. It's also possible that the monks hid away the original relics when the Western world became interested in taking them away, and the ones that were tested are just crude copies or fakes. The confusing part is that there have definitely been first-hand sightings of these Yeti creatures, told to explorers by locals or even seen by the explorers themselves, but there are also spiritual cultivators in the mountains who specifically go there to separate from society and work on themselves. And in the process, many develop the ability to do all kinds of amazing things, like resist extreme cold, navigate harsh terrain, and probably grow impressive Yeti-like beards. To me, some of the Yeti sightings could be these cultivators in remote places, but the creatures that are 10 feet tall and totally hairy except for their faces, they're clearly not human. Now take this sighting. In 1920, a telegram was received from Lieutenant Colonel C.K. Howard Bury during a reconnaissance expedition to the Mount Everest region. They were approaching the north face of Everest from the Tibetan side when, at about 17,000 feet up on the Lapka La Pass, they saw through binoculars a number of dark forms on the snowfield far above them. Well, they had to investigate, but it took a while to get the exact spot because hiking Everest is no picnic. When they got to the spot where they'd seen the figures, the men found large numbers of huge footprints, about 3 times the size of normal humans. The lieutenant colonel tried to guess that they were from a large gray wolf, but the Sherpa guide said the tracks were made by a creature of human form, which they called Meto Kongmi. The report was legit enough to be sent to the lieutenant colonel superiors in India, and interestingly, with a mix of Chinese and Nepalese, the combined term Meto Kongmi meant snowman. This is where the term abominable snowman came from in English. But here's why I thought this account was one of the most interesting out there. It's not fascinating just because we see where the term abominable snowman came from, but also because it showed a major turning point in human history. Now bear with me for a minute. Ivan Sanderson explained that in 1920 there was a boom of reporting on the Yeti because it finally had a legitimate sounding name, Abominable Snowman, along with accounts from respected Westerners to back it up. But my big question was, why are things so different today? Why would humanity all of a sudden discount a respected Sherpa guide sighting or a Tibetan monk who says he has a Yeti pelt to sit on? Why would we automatically call an explorer gullible or foolish today if we reported seeing huge tracks, Yeti droppings, or even the creature itself? Yes, people can be selfish and want fame from telling a fantastic creature sighting story, but there are also plenty of scientists and researchers who just want to explore the world and what's in it, who just want to report what they find and have help figuring out what the heck it is. Well, between 1920 and 1925, a war was breaking out between science and spirituality. For some reason, the two couldn't jive together in America, maybe because there were so many kinds of spiritual beliefs out there, but just one accepted form of science. Now, however you feel about that argument itself, that isn't the point at all of this episode. I'm not getting into that here. But in 1925, when a high school teacher named John Scopes was found guilty of denying intelligent design and only taught about evolution, the controversy blew up to the national level. This was a turning point in history. People were less open to what seems like otherworldly phenomena or mysterious legends. We don't have abominable snowman in the Americas, so we're more likely to think it's not real and that those mountain Sherpas without a college education are ignorant, stupid, or superstitious.
There are no abominable snowmen. There are no Sasquatches. There are no big feet.
Of course, we do have the abominable snowman in the West, Bigfoot, and the Alaskan Yeti. Native tribes and American explorers have come across them in our neck of the woods. And yeah, those stories have been completely discounted too. There is a creature called the Traverse-spine gorilla that was well known to the natives of Labrador and Canada in the early 1900s. A teacher named Elliot Merrick documented it in his memoir when he was there between about 1903 and 1913. About 20 years before he arrived, one of the little girls in the village was playing in an open grassy clearing when she saw a huge hairy thing with low hanging arms come out of the woods. It was a creature about 7 feet tall when it stood up, but sometimes it dropped to all fours. Across the top of its head was a white mane. It actually grinned at her with white teeth, so she ran screaming into the house. The people measured and cut out paper patterns of its tracks, which they kept for all of those years. Merrick said they were strange-looking feet about 12 inches long with a narrow heel and forking at the front into 2 toes. And get this, the depth of some of the prints indicated that this snowman could be 500 pounds. One family actually got a shot off at it. At night, they had to bar their door with a birch beam and sleep upstairs with guns and axes. Their dogs would growl at the beast when it approached, but the beast would drive the dogs into the river. One dog did face the creature, and the snowman lashed out with a stick or club that hit the corner of the house with such force it made the beams tremble. For 2 winters, the abominable snowman haunted them. My co-host John Vivanco and I on the Metaphysical podcast have done multiple episodes about the Alaskan Bigfoot, cryptids of the north, and other weird phenomena in the Canada-Alaska regions. And this account sounds a lot like what others have seen. So maybe it's the case that if you were able to get to remote regions, you'd find life anywhere, of all different kinds and sizes.
Life, finds a way.
You know, some of the most famous accounts out there about the Yeti are from the 1954 Daily Mail expedition and the 1951 expedition conducted by Eric Shipton because he brought back pictures of Yeti prints. Sherpa guides helped the team on this British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition. Dr. Tony Hagen, who spent 8 years conducting a geological survey of Nepal for the United Nations, said, quote, "We know today only that the Yeti must exist, for the tracks on the glaciers and in the snow are undoubtedly made by a living creature." That's true. If no known animal made the prints and the prints keep appearing all over, then they must be from something, right? Over 50 mountaineers and naturalists reported Yeti footprints, and they're usually consistent about the prints coming from an ape-like hairy creature. Now, I'm about to share where some really weird details appear. One account said that the Yeti makes a characteristic whistling sound and carried a large stone as a weapon. Some of them can also live a ridiculously long time. One abominable snowman living on a mountain in the Himalayas was wounded from a hunt, and the same limping creature was spotted for the following 3 generations. One account I found also said that there were secret rituals practiced by certain Tibetans who would invoke a protective deity dressed in the skin of a Yeti. They would use the creature's blood for certain magical rites. The creature would be killed with a sharp weapon or arrow, then its blood was mixed with mustard and poison. Delicious. Yeah, not sure what kind of protective deity gets summoned when you do a Yeti blood ritual like that. So maybe that's why there are reports of scary things in these areas too.
Galima. Galima.
Obviously, explorers are seeing something, and so are locals, but most people don't know about the governmental expeditions to solve the mystery of the Yeti. In a 1974 newspaper, it was reported that the Japanese were mounting their second expedition in a year in search of the Himalayan Yeti. The new hunt is to be conducted from the air with planes and helicopters, a fact which caused unlimited amusement to gritty British climber Don Wilhans, one of the few white men to have claimed a Yeti sighting. Of course, Don Wilhans said they've got no chance, not with helicopters. They are very sensitive creatures. They will hear them coming for miles. So who knows what info the Japanese obtained, but with the British government receiving the body of a Yeti all the way back in 1902, Japan hunting for the Yeti as far back as 1959 through the 70s, the Chinese government tightly controlling information in and out of the entire country, Tibetan monks holding on to secrets for generations that leaked to locals, American and British explorers encountering the Yeti from the late 1800s through at least the 1920s, it seems like maybe someone knows something more than we do about these elusive creatures. And they're not sharing it with any of us, and it's for no good reason. We're all intelligent enough to decide for ourselves what we believe and whether we think something is truthful or not. So it's about time we heard these accounts and decided for ourselves. But newspapers in the past reported that all expeditions to the area have to first seek permission from the Nepalese, Tibetan, and Bhutan governments to capture a snowman if they found one, because all three governments have special laws to protect the Yeti, whether or not he exists. Of course, why make it a law if it's not real? These were some of the most captivating and convincing stories of Yeti sightings I'd ever heard from as far back as 1887, and I'm pretty convinced this fearsome beast of the cold may just really exist. But I'll say that I also do think there are spiritual cultivators in the Himalayas and other remote mountains around the world who've developed amazing abilities, like being able to avoid frostbite, starvation, or just slashing their legs open while walking through the mountain terrain with no shoes. So some of these sightings could be these human men. But I have to leave this episode on one of the funniest accounts I ever found about a Yeti that I highly doubt you've heard. An American professor, Norman Dyrenforth, led the first U.S. team to reach the top of Everest in 1963. But several years earlier, in 1958, one of the Sherpas he was with accidentally stumbled upon a Yeti, which was, he claimed, busy eating frogs. The Sherpa was walking along with a flashlight when he saw the Yeti, which startled the beast, and it started towards him. The Sherpa quickly ran away. But what do you think? Is the abominable snowman a well-documented living creature? Is the Himalayan Yeti just folklore from superstitious people? Is the abominable snowman just a conspiracy junkie in a brown ape suit? Let me know what you think in the comments, because I always love hearing what you guys have to say. And check out my episodes on the Alaskan Bigfoot and other terrifying cryptids of the North as well. And if you want more, please consider supporting my work by subscribing to the Metaphysical.tv. Instead of a Patreon or other donation platform, we built a video platform with over 1,000 episodes on mysteries, ancient civilizations, near-death experiences, creatures, and exclusive metaphysical episodes you can't watch anywhere else. So a big shout out to our subscribers over at the Metaphysical.tv who let us keep making this awesome content. If you want to see what they're getting, like exclusive episodes, director's cuts, you can subscribe to the Mystery Junkie tier or higher. We've also got Metaphysical Coffee if you want your mornings to be interstellar. And if you want some metaphysical merch I designed myself, click on the link in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching and all of your awesome comments, your support, and everything. And remember to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And with that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.